Welcome aboard Rocket Ship, the platform with the most relevant content for competitive examinations. This is Rocket Ship IAS Lab and continuing with our series on answer writing for general studies papers of Civil Service main examination. We would take up a question that you might come across in GS paper 1. Despite being endowed with substantial reserves of many minerals, India is a net importer of minerals. Discuss the pros and cons of mineral imports for India. As you can see, this is a slightly different question. Actually, this question is framed slightly differently. In that, the first part of the question makes a certain statement, and in the second part, you have to write in the reference of the first part. That is, the first part makes this argument that India has substantial mineral endowment, India has substantial mineral reserves. Despite that, India is forced to import minerals. And in the second part, you have to talk about the pros and cons of mineral import for India. So, how do you tackle this type of questions? As you can see, the first part makes a statement, but this statement would be very relevant to your answer, to your question actually, or its answer. So, what you should do, we advise you that you certainly write about the things like India's substantial mineral reserves and the reasons why, despite having substantial mineral reserves, India is forced to import minerals. Then only you should proceed to the second part, that is the pros and cons of mineral reserves. So, how we introduce our answer? As you can see, we have talked about India's substantial mineral reserves. So we would start with this very point that India stands among the nations with largest reserves of minerals like coal, iron ore, bauxite, etc. At the same time, India clocked a bill of $8 billion last year importing minerals like copper ore, phosphorites, etc. This is excluding crude petroleum, whose import bill ran up to $130 billion. Despite subdued crude oil price, you can well understand if the crude oil prices were again they were like not subdued, India would have to import more than $130 billion of crude oil actually. So India is compelled to import minerals due to a number of reasons despite having substantial reserves of some minerals. These reasons are, as you can well understand, the first would be the most fundamental, that is reserves of low in quantity and quality. For an example, copper ore, phosphates, crude oil, these are some of the minerals for which India has very low quantity of reserves, and in some of the minerals, as we would see ahead, have substantial reserves, but their quality is again not as per the requirement. Second is issues like land acquisition, deforestation, displacement, etc. All this means that we cannot find enough land to open a new mine, for example, to start operation in a new mine. Then mineral surveys and mapping has not got due attention. Had these things been available, India would have been able to mine more mineral than it is doing right now. Then there are some governance issues like that deter private sector issues, deterring the private sector investment in the mineral sector. That is, for an example, things like unclear rules, tough wars between agencies. To give you just one example of tough wars between agencies, there is often a conflict between the forest department as well as the department that is concerned with mineral development, that is concerned with mining, because the forest department is concerned about deforestation, but the mineral development department, it has other interests. Actually, its interest is quite different. Now, taking up these points in detail, for a country of its population and size, the quantity of minerals like copper ores, phosphates, precious metals, crude oil, etc. is inadequate. Then, to give you just one example of the qualitative aspects, most of our coal is high ash thermal coal, unlike the premium high carbon metallurgical coal. We would repeat it that India, while it has substantial coal reserve, most of our coal is low quality, high ash content thermal coal, while the requirement state of it is that of the premium quality, the better quality, low ash metallurgical coal. What it essentially means, metallurgical coal essentially means the coal that is used in blast furnace for steel making. So India lacks coking coal, that is the metallurgical coal. That is why it has to import some coal too. In a densely populated country, land is scarce, forest must be protected from loss, and cultural sensitivities come into play as hurdles. We have mentioned cultural sensitivities. If we were to go a few years back, there was quite some hue and cry over the Niyamgiri issue. Niyamgiri issue. Actually, Niyamgiri, which is in Odisha, is one of the largest bauxite reserves anywhere in the world. But this Niyamgiri, as you can understand from its very name, Niyamgiri is a hill that is considered sacred by the Kond tribes. So while this mountain, this hill is rich in bauxite reserves, but it's being sacred to Dongariya Kond tribe, it raises quite some questions of cultural sensitivity. We cannot simply take over a thing that is considered sacred by a tribe. It would be a loss of its cultural, you could say, heritage. And the result was the entire mining operation had to be stopped at the Niyamgiri mines. Now, while the Geological Survey of India has done yeoman service, but no concerted mineral survey has been undertaken. Moreover, the survey results are not open to commercialization. Most of the survey results is still part of the, you could say, scholarly circle. It's not available to the commercial aspects, to the private companies, for an example. That means the mineral surveys are not coming to any fruitful use. Then there are governance issues like frequent rule changes, turf wars. We have just mentioned the example of the forest department and the mineral development department between agencies, etc. This deters private sector from this capital intensive long gestation industry. Actually, the mineral industry, the mining industry is considered a capital intensive, that it requires a lot of capital and it has long gestation period. Actually, it takes quite some time to start operation. Then only you would be making some profit. So while it requires so much capital and it takes so much time, and if the private partner, the private the private operator has to face governance issues, so he is not likely to again go for mineral investment in the mineral sector. Now, while we are compelled to import minerals, the negatives of mineral import are well recognized. What are some of the negatives of mineral import? For an example, it would lead to trade deficits. You can well understand it. Then there are some strategic implications like energy security. We could give the examples of crude oil, in which India is not self-sufficient, and still more, India is not self-sufficient in many nuclear minerals like uranium, etc. too. So India is compelled to import crude oil as well as some uranium. Then we become hostage to price fluctuations as you are not producing these things domestically, you have to become dependent on their import. And it means if their price in the international market rises, you become hostage to you actually you are again you are decided by your decisions have to go as per the international price. Then forest rates also affect price stability. You can well understand, we are importing these minerals and we have to pay for them in Indian rupee, while their you could say their list price is in dollars. So again, if our rupee were to depreciate against the dollar, it would mean we have to pay more rupee for every dollar of crude import, for an example crude oil import. So we can well understand, due to for forex rates fluctuation, we are compelled to generally pay more for the import. Now we would take up these points in detail. India's mineral imports lead to quite some trade deficit. An example being, we had to import $130 billion of crude oil last year, and all of this would lead to trade deficit. Mineral import has strategic dimensions like energy security or dependence on rivals like China for rare earth minerals. We hope you by now you are quite confident about rare earth minerals. You would already have some small notes on rare earth minerals. What happens? These minerals find use in things like cutting edge research, for example in sensors, semiconductors, etc. And for now, China is their largest producer, and there is always this fear that China would start controlling their exports to its rivals like India and USA. India also becomes hostage to price fluctuations, forex rates fluctuations, etc., with implications for inflation, our own national budget, etc. But again, while we have already discussed the cons of mineral import, it's not always negative. Mineral import has some positives too. For example, it means India can source the minerals at attractive and in fact competitive rates. An example that is often given, that the coal from Australia is actually cheaper than the domestically mined coal. And we have already known this, that we are importing quite some crude oil from Russia because it's available on a competitive price. Moreover, we have to also learn from examples of countries like Japan, Korea, and in fact Switzerland too, Switzerland, etc., which focus on value addition. Actually, these are some of the countries like Japan, Korea, Switzerland, etc., which have very meager mineral resources. Their mineral resources are not sufficient for their countries. But what these countries have actually done, while they import raw material, while they import raw mineral, they process it and add quite some value to prepare, you could say, premium priced product. For example, Japan's steel is well known. Similarly, Switzerland, which imports precious metals, diamond, etc., is well known for its high quality luxury jewelry. So these countries actually add much more value and command premium price in the international market. India too has some cases in this point. For example, we are surplus in petroleum products. While we have to import crude oil, we are quite some surplus in petroleum products, which we are exporting to the extent of $70 billion last year, and gems and jewelry, which clocked $25 billion of export last year. You are well aware that India is compelled to import precious metals and gems like diamond. But India adds quite some value with its well known prowess in the gems and jewelry industry. Its artistic gems and jewelry command quite some premium in the international markets. So ultimately, it's to India's benefit to import, for example, the precious metal and gems, and in turn export the jewelry. So the conclusion we can make here, the conclusion we can draw from the whole discussion is that while scoping for minerals should get its due, we must focus on exporting value added finished goods. We should not unnecessarily worry about the mineral import as long as we are able to add value to it and export the manufactured product. That is often of higher value, it commands a premium price. This is how we sum up the answer for today. But before we call it a day, let us talk about a very fundamental thing. Many of you would wonder how we actually recall all these pieces of statistics for the actual market. Actually, it's quite easy. To be very frank, it's not that tough. The first thing you should do, that you should have your running notes at hand. You should prepare running notes and where you should note down some important pieces of statistics. Second, you should not nitpick and go for exact figure. That's not needed. What you should instead do, you round off the figures. For example, last year India clocked either 132 or 133 billion dollars of crude oil import, but we are not mentioning that figure. Rather than we can go for 130 billion dollars that we have indeed done in this discussion too. Similarly, some figures like 25 billion dollars of gems and jewelry export, these are figures that are easier to remember. And third thing, there is no easy way out. You should start early with your answer writing practice. That is the only thing, because once you start using the statistics for actual answer attempts, so you would be able to recall them for the actual examination. This is all we have to say for today. We would reassemble for the next lecture in a few days. As usual, we wish you all the best. Thank you.